Ladies and gentlemen, in this Gaming.com video, Sony have confirmed PlayStation 2 emulation is coming to the PlayStation 4, but there are some caveats. So I'm going to read out the rather short quote which was sent to Wired via an email. We are working on utilising PlayStation 2 emulation technology to bring PS2 games forward to the current generation. We have nothing further to comment at this point in time. So if you're kind of hoping for more information, for example, how will this work, when will it be implemented, and so on and so forth, unfortunately we can only speculate. Now there are some points that we can make. From what we understand, they are not porting old code to the PlayStation 4. From what we understand, the PlayStation 2 games which have been shown running on the PlayStation 4 are native PS2 code which are running on an emulator. So for example, Super Star Wars, Racer Revenge and a few others are essentially, I guess you could say, almost pre-order bonuses. And it is a bit of a, I guess it kind of flew under the radar really. I mean, let's face it, you expected Sony to almost make a big announcement of this, like show God of War, show Final Fantasy X, show anything, you know, the big PlayStation 2 hitters, but no. It's also unknown how this is going to work in the grand scheme of things. So we know at the moment that the PlayStation 2 emulator does do a few things. For example, it does upscale the game, so yes, it will look a lot nicer. Yes, it will have, for example, texture filtering and maybe some anti-aliasing, that type of stuff. But how will it work, for example, if you want to play a game that you already have in your library? So by which I mean, let's just say that you've got a God of War. So can you just put God of War into your PlayStation 2 and the disc will work? Oh, sorry, into your PlayStation 4, will the disc work? Well, that's unknown. It could end up being that it'll check, say, oh, that's God of War, and then it will have to download code, or you might have to buy the game from the ground up. You know, you have to get the whole thing, purchase it from the digital store, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Then again, it could be that Sony are going to keep this as almost like a bonus. So yes, they've done it with Star Wars, but maybe they're going to do it for other games. For example, we all know you've got God of War Collection on the PlayStation 4, you've got The Last of Us and these other games as well. So maybe Sony are going to use this technology to kind of reinvigorate or bring back games which haven't seen releases since the PlayStation 2. I guess that's a possibility, so it could be almost like a circus of values. So technically speaking with that, you could have games which maybe span the eons. You could have games that run on PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and then they could have kind of almost pseudo remasters for that, and then they could release the PlayStation 4 games, which would be great, considering that a lot of gamers, according to Sony, a lot of gamers who are buying the PlayStation 4 didn't necessarily own the PlayStation 3 or the PlayStation 2. I guess the real question here, though, is would that be the best move for Sony? And the answer is probably no. My gut feeling is that this was kind of unintentional. Sony wanted to almost fly under the radar, or hope people didn't really think about this or notice this, which doesn't really make sense from any particular standpoint. Most people would say this is running on an emulator, or this is either, you know, if it's not running on an emulator, it has been ported, and people would start poking around and figuring this out. It's not, you know, rocket science to, you know, kind of figure that people would start questioning or asking someone, or someone in the industry would talk. It's just how the games industry is, which is why I always find it rather laughable that people try to keep this stuff so secretive. My point being that if that is the case, it's possible that Sony in 1, 2, 3, 4 months time would want to make this a big announcement and make it like a big feature, because we know that Microsoft have got a lot of kudos for the whole Xbox One backwards compatibility thing. PlayStation 2 backwards compatibility on the PlayStation 4 is not as difficult. You guys can go ahead, do some Googling, and there are a lot of PlayStation 2 emulators on PC. Well, I say a lot, there are a couple of good ones, and some of them are pretty damn accurate in terms of how well they can actually replicate the PlayStation 2 experience. Now, yes, you do need a fairly beefy system, but that's because ultimately they are not running on fixed hardware. So obviously you can't do the same level of optimization on the emulator. But essentially speaking, you don't really need that much of a beefy system, at least in comparison to what's available now. As long as you've got a reasonably good CPU and you've got a reasonable GPU, you can pretty much run anything at a decent resolution, and it does look a lot better. For example, if you want to play something like, let's just say Silent Hill 2 on the PlayStation 2, it's sometimes better just to run it on an emulator where you can have a much greater internal resolution, and it looks a lot nicer for that. It's got better textures and all the other bits and pieces. That's not to say that it's going to make it look like a PlayStation 3 game or anything like that, but it will look considerably better than the standard game would if you were playing it through the PlayStation 2. I think it's fair to say that Sony have, at least according to rumours, been pursuing this. We know that, yes, they do have the streaming services with PlayStation Now, and they have been heavily criticised with that, but we know that they do want, or gamers do want, emulation. So the idea of actually having local emulated hardware, or local emulated hardware on the PlayStation 4, in this case the PlayStation 2 being emulated on the PlayStation 4, is definitely the way forward, particularly for latency sensitive games. And in my opinion, I'm actually kind of excited about this. It's not as big as the PlayStation 3 running in terms of, you know, emulation on the PlayStation 4, but it's not bad. I'm kind of curious to see why Sony can't do PlayStation 3 emulation on the PS4. It could be to do with the fact that the cell processor is considerably more complicated than Xbox 360's CPU. It really is. It's kind of a monster. That's not to say that it would be impossible, but I have a feeling it would be a great feat of engineering for them to do that. But the PlayStation 2 definitely is a possibility, and it would be kind of curious if it would support both physical copies of the game. In other words, you know, let's say you pick a game out of your shelf and you just put it in, and also naturally, you know, software based as well. That would be kind of cool. So you could go in and download a game, and that would be pretty awesome as well. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.